Good afternoon, gentlemen. This is going to be the Unit 2 review for the examination, Florida Geology, Land from the Sea, 20-question test. And let's go over the slides again in case you missed them. And here we go. You might remember we showed a video of how Florida was underwater for at least 5 times in its history. All right, let's move on to the next slide. This is a slide showing the geographic regions of Florida. We have the Central Highlands where most of the lakes are found. It's also where the aquifer is in its, most of the aquifer goes to the Central Highlands. Look up in the lowlands here, look up in the corner. The lowlands here, this is where the Apalachicola River has cut through the northern highlands of Florida, and that's why the lowlands, that's the river that divides the Eastern Standard Time Zone from the Central Standard Time Zone. Also, this area here, the lowlands, is where we have, right here is where the St. Johns River flows north, the only river in the United States to flow north. Okay, we talked about the Florida aquifer, over 100,000 square miles of this karst under the entire length of Florida, part of the Okefenokee Swamp. Everything you see here is this giant geological formation of what looks like sponge cake made out of calcium carbonate, caves, huge areas where water is flowing freely. We do not know at what speed, right? Heading all south, and when it comes to South Florida, underneath the Biscayne aquifer, which is not very low below our feet, it comes to the surface and flows out into Florida Bay. So this is this entire underwater system where 90% of the drinking water Florida uses, especially South Florida, comes from the aquifer. The Florida aquifer and the Biscayne aquifer. All right, there's the karst formations that are millions of years old. We saw that video, okay? You can go back and look at these if you want. These will also be up on topics if you want to review the films again. Let's go to our next slide here. All right, now we talked about something called recharge areas. And recharge areas is when rainfall percolates from into the soil, is filtered by all this clay and sand and marble, right? And as it marl, pardon me, and it returns to the aquifer in a very pristine state. This is a great filtration system, and it's a natural system, but as Florida continues to grow and the population increases and we have more construction, concrete, asphalt, you name it, the water can no longer seep back into its origins, the aquifer. And so the water that's stuck in the parking lot of the school, for an example, or at where the Dolphins play, Hard Rock Stadium, that water boils off back into the atmosphere to the tune of about 5 billion gallons a day. All right, remember we talked about sinkholes? Remember, anybody can basically put a pump and a pipe into the Florida aquifer. You're not taxed. There's no water tax. This water is in essence free. The only thing you pay for is the electricity to pump it out. Whether you're commercial, you're private, whatever, right? You can use this water freely. There are limited restrictions. But when the aquifer drops so low, whether because of overuse or droughts, we can see that sometimes the karst will collapse and sinkholes will form. Now, the opposite of a sinkhole is a spring, where the calcium carbonate is weak, the hydrostatic pressure from the aquifer is like a overextended hose, the rubber gets weak, and the water begins to rupture through the surface, and that's called a spring. Now, we talked about Florida sinkholes, that we said that probably the #1 spot for Florida sinkholes is in this area right around Orlando. Yes, I see St. Pete and I see Tampa, right? But the most damage, the greatest frequency, is in the Orlando area currently. So here in South Florida, we seem to be okay. All right, another model of the aquifer, freshwater springs, okay, recharge areas, nothing to stop the rain from coming back and giving its substance to the aquifer. Good word, recharge. All right, you can see all the lakes from in the Central Highlands, which is really the main line of the aquifer. And when we went cave diving, right, in these areas up here, right, this can be as up to 300 to 400 feet below the surface to get into the aquifer. But yet down here in the Everglades, some places, it's not even a foot before you reach the feather-thin aquifer. It all depends on where you are, okay? Up here, 300, 350 feet. Down here, less than a foot. Remember, most of Dade County is artificial. When I say that, there's been fill put on top of it. So like my house is at 9 feet, 8 inches. I thought it was 11, but the deed says 9 and change. And about 6 feet of that is fill to keep me out of the waters if the hurricanes come. All right? Nothing in this slide we didn't know at the moment. Now this is important. The canals and levee systems. We talked about the fact that if the Everglades were left alone and not had been drained by Napoleon Bonaparte Broward in the 19th century, and that the Army Corps of Engineers in Florida and the federal government decided to drain these waters, Columbus would be about 6 feet, the parking lot would be about 6 feet underwater. So would the Miami International Airport. These canals were put in all the way up to the 1970s and beyond to dry out this land so we can live on it, to farm it. Also, to make sure that no standing water after hurricane season floods South Florida. So this was done for both convenience, hurricane flooding, and to dry out land that belonged to Everglades so we could build and farm on it. We talked about the sinkholes in Orlando. That was a bad one where the Porsche distributorship was literally devoured. We talked about the quality of water being second worst in the nation, especially in Tampa, because of what they use to clean it, and also because what we throw in our backyard, everything from paint thinners to pesticides, that we throw in our backyard, whether it's used oil, goes right back into the aquifer. We talked about the barrier islands, all right? We talked about how these guys use a lot of what they call septic tanks, and how these septic tanks are literally getting old and deteriorating, and the waste products are going right into the intercoastals, and how their fresh water is not coming from aquifers, but from wells deep into the mainland. You might remember Unit 1, 80% of Florida's population lives within 20 miles of the ocean. We talked about how FIU professors are asking us to plant salt-tolerant mangroves and other plants because they believe because of global warming, South Florida is going to rise the water levels, and that the natural canopy we have, which is not salt-tolerant, will die off. And to save whatever forest we have, we need to convert from whatever forest we have now to forests of salt-tolerant mangroves for the future. These guys at FIU truly believe that global warming is going to change the coastline of South Florida within your lifetime, within my lifetime, and definitely within your lifetime. There were some of the breakout questions we did. That was the homework, right? And then we got into population shifts, and we're seeing that South Florida is getting anywhere between 9 to 1,700 new people a day. Shoot, that's a lot of high schools to build in the future, all right? We can go past this slide, and we start talking about saltwater intrusion. And saltwater intrusion is when the aquifer is so weak, it can no longer push the salt water out, and the salt water is replacing the fresh water. We talked about how this is an ongoing problem that's going to have to be addressed. And let's go on to the next slide if we can. All right. You can take a look at that at your leisure. Saltwater intrusion just isn't in St. Petersburg and Fort Myers and Naples and Miami Beach. It's starting to happen in South Dade too. Luckily, it's not at a point where the water is contaminated. It's still potable, but it is an issue. Okay. We also talked about the mangroves, South Dade, the black mangroves that hold the beaches together, good for soil, and how the hurricanes have literally, Hurricane Andrew literally tore the black mangroves out of Homestead Air Force Base. We talked about shallow wells, artesian wells, and the wells that now we're going to have to go really, really deep to start forcing water back in from reclaimed areas to keep saltwater intrusion from our deepest wells. We talked about the idea of illumination, light pollution, and how each one of these dots of light represents heat, and how heat affects weather, and weather affects climate. And we talked about the 24th parallel, and how we may not be that subtropical paradise in the future, that we may be on our way to becoming a desert like other areas of the 24th parallel. But there's not enough scientific evidence to suggest it. It's a fact, but it is a theory. Sinkholes of Central Florida. We talked about some of the great springs, magnitude 1 springs that are over 1 million gallons of water an hour, such as Devil's Den near Gainesville. Okay, we can go past that, still in the springs. And we talked about the idea of phosphates and fertilizers and runoff. This is a big problem, especially when you use phosphate, which used to be in fertilizers and also was in laundry detergent, because when it gets in the runoff from the factories, whether it's dumped into local canals, whether you use it in your yard, the weed killer, the pesticides, the fertilizer, trying to kill those little silver dollar leaves, the clover, it all eventually helps feed the blue-green algae, which chokes, right, the ecosystems of our coastline. And when you choke the ecosystems of the coastline, you hurt the economy, because you hurt the oysters, you hurt the redfish, you hurt the mangroves, you hurt everything. That was that photograph from the Florida Springs, cave diver, all the magnitude 1, 2, and 3 springs. You can take a closer look at that. Okay. We talked about how fact it could be 90 degrees in North Florida. This one's not far from Tallahassee. The water's like about a nice 65 to 70 degrees, no matter how hot the day is. Again, phosphate and pollution runoff, algae blooms, not to be confused with red tide, part of the St. Johns River, the Central Highlands, the lakes that go right into the aquifer. We talked about the idea of hydrology. Hydrology is the study of science, and remember, the word we use is potable. And you might remember the example we used of the 10-gallon aquarium. But if we had 10 gallons to represent the entire Earth's water, that most of it would be salt, and I could take 10 drops of water out of that 10. 7 of them would not be salt, but they would not be potable or drinkable. That only 3 drops out of an entire aquarium, a 10-gallon aquarium, would be potable water that you and I and animals could drink. So hydrology is the science of water. Okay. We talked about the idea of tectonic plates. We talked about the idea that Florida, even though they've had a record through the years of some good shocks, that they're not going to get like the killer earthquakes that you have in Japan or in Haiti and other places, because we're on the middle of the plate. The edge of the plate is in Cuba, and we know that where the plates touch, the tectonic plates, that's where you find most of your really serious earthquake activity. Yeah, not looking too good for California, is it, man? We talked about landfills, South Dade landfill. Man, take a close look at this. This is on the test, especially this part, 4.4 pounds per day, 17.4 pounds per family. And as a country, right, the magic number is 254 million tons. Take a real close look at that slide. I'm going to pull 2 questions out of the test in this slide by itself, so make sure you study this one. All right. These were some of the landfills, and we're talking about the Mount Trashmores, how they are actually higher than the highest points of Florida, which is Paxton in Walton County at 345 feet. Now, I guarantee you this is on the test. I give this to you. Plastic bottles in the Pacific, in the Atlantic, in the Caribbean, on land, in the water, 450 years for a single plastic bottle to deteriorate. 450 years. I told you if you took every bottle ever made or every piece of plastic ever made since plastic was invented, right, after World War II, it would cover the entire nation of Argentina up to 6 feet. There's Mount Trashmore in 1981. It is much higher near the Black Point Marina, and we know that the liner is torn and it is leaking. It is leaking right into the Biscayne National Park, and these chemicals, right, are very bad for the environment, and there's no way to pull the stuff out and repair the leak. We also talked about how they have to burn off the methane because the methane can be explosive. That's why you see those flames sometimes coming out of the landfills trying to burn off all the methane that they can. Again, the Dade County South Dade landfill, right? We talked about how it's leaching into the pristine national park, how it's going to affect the environment. It has affected the environment. And here it is. Here's the ridge. There's that Atlantic coastal ridge we talked about. And if there had not been those drainage ditches, right, all these areas here would be underwater. They're not, because of the drainage ditches that we built. So this is the highlands, right? This is the spine. And that's why at the end of this, right, that's why elevation stops. And that's why it's really, really dangerous to have to live in these areas during hurricane season because of a tidal surge, storm surge. Again, I'll ask you about the aquifer known as Biscayne underneath our very feet. The recycling effort of the 1980s, which had mixed effects. We talked about kaolin clay, this type of clay that literally is used in Crayolas and also in kitty litter. Kaolin clay is a very oily, if you will. Sorry guys, the cat is disturbing my IT here. Okay, talked about it's a multi-million-dollar industry, and that they made everything from plates, the Crayola, ceramics, used to absorb grease in garages and to filter oils and food such as salad dressing. We talked about the Oolite limestone, very hard, had the little tiny, looked like honeycombs and shells that go back into the Jurassic Age and before. This is all part of the highlands. That was the bottom of the ocean. Talked about how in architecture, these Miami Oolite and Miami limestone is very valuable. Still used in Coral Gables. It was used in the 1930s as a very effective and decorative way. And remember, all coral and all limestone here having a magic ingredient, and that ingredient is calcium carbonate. We talked about coquina, a really kind of weird shell that it's only in northeast Florida, that the Spanish built their forts out of, forced the Indians to mine this stuff. It's very soft, but surprisingly very flexible. And we talked about at San Marcos and St. Augustine, how the cannonballs would not fracture the coquina block, but the block would actually just absorb the energy. Okay. Winter Park, talking about sinkholes there. There's the Atlantic coastal plain, right? Okay, which meets the Gulf coastal plain, and it was almost like South Florida kind of crashed into North Florida and Georgia when the Earth was created. And you can see here, you can see the lakes, and you can see the Central Highlands, and you can see where the aquifer opens up as it comes to the surface. And this all used to be Everglades until it was drained for construction. Now we talked about Winley Key and the idea of keystone, used on Henry Flagler's railroad, used to build houses which are virtually hurricane-proof. And you can see the exoskeletons of what used to be coral literally on the bottom of the ocean. They stopped cutting this in the 1960s, and that was a pretty good video. I hope you enjoyed that. And the idea of aggregate. Aggregate is the use of the sticky material in limestone to make concrete. The Romans discovered it back in their empire, right? But we still use it now. I don't know if anyone ever uses Chattahoochee anymore like this, or like, you know, the type of. If you look at the old floors at Columbus High School, right? They would use this really strong aggregate, throw the stones in it, and polish it, right? And that's where you get those dots in the floor, all right? And that's it's known as a Florida concept known as terrazzo. It's coming back; it's very popular. But the concrete in the 1970s and 60s was much stronger than it is today because of the aggregate. They don't use as much aggregate today, so it's not as strong. That's the real sticky part of the calcium carbonate, limestone. We talked about Dade County pine, practically termite proof, and the old Florida crackers, when they built their houses in the early 1900s, insisted on this pine. It's kind of an oily pine because they said it was virtually termite proof and you couldn't even drive a nail through it. So remember, men, the test is going to be 20 questions, 10 true and false, 10 multiple choice. Look at these slides again, either look at my video, and if you have any questions, email me, and I'll be more than happy to help you out any way I can. And best of